I see Magda joined. Hi, Magda. Nice to see you.
Hi,
and Alex Parker. Hi, Alex. Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone.
Hello.
Happy New Year, everybody.
What do you think, Peter? You wanna?
Looks like a good group here. I think we're ready to roll. So welcome. I know many of you. I used to work on the working group. My name is Peter Lauterborn. I work at Civic Edge Consulting, and I'm just filling in for Rosie today, who's out. We have a full agenda. We can go to the next slide here. First meeting in a little while. It's going to be a lot of inform, going over a lot of what's been going on recently. We'll do a brief check-in, go over hear your announcements, then talk through what's been going on with the Potrero project. Then we'll get a run through of the general obligation bond that SFMTA is putting out for consideration this year. And then we're going to end the meeting talking through the upcoming calendar and next steps for where the working group will be going from here. Next slide, please. So just a few reminders for members as well as any members of the public that might be listening in at this time. If you want to share a thought, a note, you don't want to speak at that particular moment, the chat is a great way to quickly share that. If you do want to speak, please use the raise hand function. I'll take your name down and make sure that we get to you. We might keep most questions for the end of a given segment. So again, if you want to do something you want to address more immediately, the chat's a great way to do that. We're going to ask that you keep your device on mute unless you are speaking at that particular moment, just so that any background noises or like my 2-year-old starts throwing another tantrum, right? So it doesn't take up the meeting. And then we recommend that people use the gallery view to see as many of the participants as possible. It's just easier to see people's reactions and who might be wanting to respond to something. For members of the public, if you wish to participate, you will be placed on mute upon entering the virtual space, regardless of whether or not you're joining by video or phone. And then at the end of the meeting, there will be time for public comment, at which point we will call on individuals at that time. So with that, we're going to do a quick check-in for the working group members about your hopes for 2022, kicking off the year of the tiger here. And so is there anything you want to share with us? Or are there any other community updates, things that you're working on or involved in that might not be directly to the project, but something that you want us to know about? So with that, John, you're going to kick us off?
I will. Yeah, thank you, Peter. I just want to say I'm looking forward to meeting you all in person at some point. I've met several of you at certain functions, whether it was tabling on street fairs or the December get-together we had. But I'm looking forward to the time when we're on top of COVID and in front of it, so we can get together as a group in person and continue working on this project.
Wonderful. Who'd like to go next?
Don't everybody jump in at once. I'll go. Good to see everybody. A lot of smiling faces, and just good to see everybody's still healthy. And I don't know if you've had any bumps, but I'm just telling you that the future is so bright that we've got to wear shades, okay?
Only get better. Anyone else?
I guess
I'll go ahead and chime in. So I'm relatively new to the working group taking place for Mary, who is one of our board members. She moved to the Denver metro area. And so our thing as the Friends of Franklin Square is we are definitely looking for some new board members. So if you'd like to jump in and help us out, that'd be great. But I wanted to say hi to everyone too.
Yeah, welcome, Julian, and we miss Mary. Yeah, so I guess I just hope that we'll be able to get together in person at some point this year. It's more fun that way.
Fair enough. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else?
Hi, this is Alex. I don't, can you see my picture?
Yes.
I just wanted to say that I started working on this working group when my daughter was just born, and now she's 3. So
I love it.
she's been involved for a while now.
It's great to see you both.
And I sent around a note to John, Peter, but I just want to let the group know I will have to drop off at 6:30, unfortunately. So I'll probably keep my comments to a minimum.
Or get them all in while you can. That works too. All right. Anyone else? Okay, we're going to mosey along here. So we're going to start off with some updates from the SFMTA to talk about some staffing and other agency initiatives.
Hello, this is Kirsten McGarry, and I'm familiar to many of you. I've been in most of the Potrero working group meetings, and I'm a senior manager in charge of facilities and real property, including real estate for the MTA. We had to say farewell to Lucinia, who took a wonderful opportunity at SFUSD, and we miss her. But the rest of the technical, financial, legal, and management team members remain the same, and we're all excited about working on this project. So John's going to talk about Muni service changes, and I'm going to talk about one of the projects nearby, one of our 30 major facilities at 1200 15th Street, and a next door sewer project after John. So take it away, John.
Thank you, Kirsten. As you know, SFMTA has been trying to bring back service to certain levels that best benefit the people who live and work in San Francisco. And one of those service changes is happening this February, February 19th specifically, as we bring back full service of the J Church train. So it will be continuing into the tunnel instead of stopping at Church and Dubose starting February 19th. So J Church riders will be able to have a one-seat journey all the way downtown through Market Street to the Embarcadero station. So that's a big development. Other developments on the with the February service changes are the rest of the Muni lines will be running through the tunnel on Sundays to midnight, and that will match the BART service, which will also be extended through midnight on Sundays as well. So we're matching BART service with our own Muni service regarding rail. Other changes, if you go to the next slide, Peter, just want to mention briefly that there will be further changes in March, and specifically for this project, the closest service line change to the Potrero Yard property itself is probably the 10 Townsend. We're bringing back the 10 Townsend, and it's been one of the service lines we've had to put on hold for a little while, but on March 5th, we'll be instituting a lot of bus service changes, including the reinstitution or the reintroduction of the 10 Townsend. There are other lines as well, like the 21 and the 2 that will be coming back, and there are other changes as well. You can see just a sample of them here on this slide. But if you go to the website at SFMTA and look up 2022 service changes, you'll see the full slate of changes we've got. As you know, we've been dealing with a lot of changes and we've had to be very flexible in this time of COVID. So we appreciate your patience and understanding as we continue to move forward with these and other service changes. And by the way, if you're not subscribed to the SFMTA text updates or email updates, that's a great way to be kept informed about these kinds of service changes and the kinds of problems we may have on a specific day. So once again, we have to be flexible and we appreciate your patience. And now I'd like to give it back to Kirsten, unless you have any questions. Are there any questions regarding service changes that we might be able to try to answer? I think the 10 coming back is something that will get people interested and get people excited.
Can I have analog raised hand feature? I saw Thor and then I saw JR.
I'll be brief. And John, you can also communicate with me offline if it's better.
Sure.
I understand that the MTA is going to be starting some shuttles to and from the Hunters Point shipyard. Can you say a little bit about that?
I honestly can't. I'm not that informed on that specific topic, but there might be somebody else on this call or in this meeting who could speak to that. So
It's probably easiest to just send me an email about it if you don't mind.
Okay.
Because it doesn't have a lot to do with the Potrero yard. It's a general update, but
Sure.
let JR go. Thanks.
I'll find out what I can and get back to you.
Well, I might be able to quickly answer that. So as part of the Bayview Community Transportation Plan that the MTA led, there was a recommendation to implement a shuttle. And we have since gotten a grant to implement a pilot, but we can follow up on the details. So that's the current plan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Yeah, any details would be excellent. I've heard a little bit
Thank
about
you.
it in the
Thank you, John.
community and I'm just curious. Thank you.
I had just a quick question on the 10 Townsend route. I see that you are going to avail yourself of the 16th Street instead of 17th Street, which is great. The other question I think that we had was about maybe stop consolidation. You've got on, I think it's Daharo that it runs up, but you have multiple stops within a block of each other on a very flat piece of land. And so, I think it's 15th or Alameda is very duplicative and not very well used. And we could increase the reliability and lower the amount of time it takes to run the route if we, removed that superfluous stop. Has that been looked at, John, or do you know anything about how that conversation has gone?
I don't, but I'm going to record your comment, file it, and follow up and get back to you. JR.
Thank you.
Thank you for that input. That's really good. Very specific. Appreciate it.
Not seeing any other hands raised virtually or otherwise. Does anyone else have any questions or comments about the restoration of service? No. Okay. Well, then, Christian, could we go and talk about 1215th Street and other roads?
Sure, but that I'm going to talk to you about 10 Townsend because John Angelico and I were at the Potrero Hill Festival and there was a table right next to us about bring back the 10 Townsend. So your voices were heard by the MTA. And thank you for the neighbors campaigning for that, especially those living at the top of the hill who want to get up the hill. So going back down to the bottom of the hill, here's 1215th Street. We did a land swap and building swap with the Animal Care and Control. This building has been in the city family since 1930. And rather than Animal Care and Control staying in that building, they needed a different building that was bigger and totally rehabbed. So we gave our 1893 overhead lines building to Animal Care and Control in a swap approved by the Board of Supervisors. And we inherited their building at 1215th Street. For our enforcement team who have been in leased building at 505 7th Street for decades, and it's way too small for them. So this building will be totally rehabbed from the bottom to the top, but the historic building facade will be kept. On the roof will be solar power, and inside will be our enforcement headquarters. Outside, there will be an SFPUC sewer line project. So you'll see both of these happening at the same time. Right now, we have about 24 people in the building, but they will move out because their current building is too crowded during COVID. So they're temporarily there until construction starts through the Department of Public Works. And simultaneously, the PUC sewer line project will happen. So all of this should be done by 2026, we hope. So watch your neighborhood, walk around and see what's going on at 1200 15th Street. And thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, thank you.
I'm not seeing any, so we can move on.
Okay, this is Bonnie Jean. Nice to see all of you again. So wanted to obviously get to key updates on the Potrero Yard project. Basically looking ahead, I think as all of you know, we had an exciting end to the year, December 30th. So in November, we actually went to the Policy and Governance Committee about sort of next steps with the procurement process and the pre-development agreement. I'll talk a little bit about that to all of you. And then at the end of the year, received proposals from our proposers. And then looking ahead, we're right now looking at a date in February. So this month to go back to the SFMTA board. And then looking even further towards spring and summer of 2022, sort of key next steps in the procurement process. So selection of a proposer, executing the pre-development agreement, and then even looking at MME, construction of our temporary bus yard at MME in summer 2022. So I'll kind of go through each of these and kind of talk through the next steps. If we want to go to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, in terms of the end of the year, we ended it with a bang. The 3 shortlisted developer teams submitted proposals. That's Potrero Mission Community Partners, Potrero Neighborhood Collective, and Potrero Yard Community Partners. Each of those teams, we have on our website the full breadth of the team for each of those in terms of the various component developers and affordable housing developer and all of that are on the team. So you can always go back to our website and check. So those proposals were submitted in response to the RFP. Those were all of the 3 shortlisted teams that did respond. And then the next step in that process is sort of happening now as we enter in spring 2022, is the selection of the preferred proposer and the execution of the pre-development agreement, or PDA. And so basically from that selection process, then comes, time is needed to kind of get all the final documentation, have folks sign on the dotted line, and that's actually the execution of the PDA. And so we should be done with that process in spring 2022, and then we can announce that we have a developer team selected. So we'll certainly, that process is ongoing right now. It's a very confidential process. So, we'll be able to, at its conclusion, be able to announce it. But right now, the project team is really in the midst of this very confidential process. And I can talk more about, next slide, the PDA process, which is a portion of it. So right now, although the MTA board agenda has not been posted for February 15th, but our project team is just planning on that date. So still tentative, but basically, we are tentatively planning to go to the SFMTA board on the pre-development agreement for Potrero Yard. And so that basically means that we are requesting the board to approve the pre-development agreement, the form of the pre-development agreement, and then to authorize Jeffrey Tumlin, our Director of Transportation, to execute that agreement with the preferred proposer team. And so that process is really like that piece comes after the conclusion of a lengthy process last year. I think we briefed the group that basically there were a series of one-on-ones with our 3 proposer teams. And so it was a three-way technical design and intensive commercial negotiation. And that all ended with a settling of the terms of the pre-development. And so that agreement is really to govern the next about year and a half of the Potrero Yard project. Whenever that gets signed, probably around a year and a half until the project agreement gets signed. So that PDA process actually includes the development of the project agreement terms. There's actually a term sheet in the PDA that's sort of the general outline for what that project agreement will look like. And over the next, that time period of the PDA, though all of those details will continue to get ironed out in terms of what that final project agreement will look like. So the pre-development agreement is just a step in the overall process for a certain period of time to govern this period of time. The types of things that are going to happen once the developer team is selected and, kind of during this PDA phase will be, and you see like sort of 7 overall goals listed there. So certainly the developer team will come up with a number of plans. So, that's everything from a project management delivery plan to our POETS plan, like a public outreach and engagement plan, right? And so it's closely tied to that point number 2, public outreach. So we will be, our project team and the MTA will work closely with the selected developer team to come up with a public outreach and engagement plan. Where are the points that we are just kind of really educating people on the process to date, or what the results of the procurement process are, but also where are the opportunities and where are the decision space, where there's still decision space available and the public can weigh in. That's likely, think about all those, this group has been so involved in looking at the public benefits of the project. And those are sort of the general areas where we'll probably see, those opportunities to weigh in further moving forward during this PDA phase. Number 3, you also see the housing development approach on there. So this is really how the developer puts together their housing plan. So only after the project pre-development agreement is signed, that is when the developer can start pursuing funding opportunities for things like affordable housing, right? So like thinking through there's a whole application process for affordable housing tax credits, and all of that happens during this time. And then really the how much funding is gotten, that will determine the overall scope of the housing piece. So, that's sort of what's happening on the housing front during this time. Of course, you see number 4, there's site due diligence going on and schematic design for both the bus yard component and the housing component. So that's all happening during this time. The pre-development agreement will govern that. And then you see here the project agreement for the commercial and financial structuring. Like I said, the pre-development agreement has that term sheet that will help determine that outline that will help determine, where that project agreement ends up, what it actually looks like. And then finally, another key part of this process is, that piece at the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors in terms of the entitlement process. The project has already gone through the draft EIR process. And so this next step will be kind of taking those draft recommendations, that draft assessment, and really saying, okay, now we're going to, kind of go through the final EIR and finalize all of that, finalize the EIR, finalize the determination, and that will all go into the determining the final CEQA clearance for the project. So that's the EIR. There's also, you see rezoning there. You might remember, and I think we've had conversations with this group, this project will have our own ordinance for height and bulk. And so, for the final EIR, it has to be within that outer envelope that the draft EIR has already been. So it can be smaller, but within that envelope that's already been described in the draft EIR process. So that all happens during this time. And then finally, also procurement for design, build, and facility maintenance contractors also happens now. So before I jump to the next slide, and you know, like I said, a lot of the project team is in this this confidential process that's ongoing now, but I'm happy to try to answer questions about the PDA. And we can certainly come back and you know, talk about it more. Like I said, we'll be discussing it with the MTA board on the 15th. Perhaps next week, we'll see if the agenda comes out and if we're on it. Questions?
You have, I believe, one more slide.
I do.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure.
so I can jump to the next slide and, you know, kind of if there's no specific questions on the PDA, yeah, Peter, why don't you bring me to the next kind of milestones?
Yeah, and then
So
so
kind of-
far I see Scott and Claudia in the queue, so I see you. Thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll just jump to this last slide and then we'll take questions maybe all at once. So, you know, in terms of looking ahead for kind of construction, what's on the horizon? So everyone here knows that we are constructing a temporary bus yard at Muni Metro East. And that can be used for, you know, expansion, you know, to deal with expansion of our fleet, but it will also be used as we reconstruct various yards. Potrero would be the first one that our bus operations would move to Muni Metro East during the time period that Potrero is under construction. So first, we got to build Muni Metro East. And so that will start, that'll kick off this summer of this year and go through early 2024. And once that's complete, then Potrero construction can start in early 2024, expected to complete in early 2027. And during that time period, that's when bus operations would move over to Muni Metro East. But yeah, with that, I can do the best I can with questions. And I know I have some of the team here to help as well. Peter, did you say you saw Scott first?
Yes, let's have Claudia and then Scott and then Alex.
Thank you for taking my question. Can you please go back to the previous slide? Thank you. So number 3 around the housing development approach, can you just say a little bit more about what is baked in regardless of the acquisition of certain funding and grant sources, et cetera? My understanding is that we're still, the floor for affordable housing in this envelope is 50%. I just want to make sure that that's true regardless of the amount of funding that is pursued and sought.
Yeah, I absolutely, Claudia. So yes, that's right. In the RFP, it specifies that the 50% is minimum. So it's the floor for the percentage of affordable housing that's needed up to 100%, right? So, so no matter what it looks like, 50% absolutely is the floor. I don't know if there's anyone else in terms of I mean, that answers your main question. I don't know if you have, if others want to comment or if you have like other specifics that you're wondering in terms of the housing piece.
I guess I just want some more specifics around how is it finally determined whether it's going to be 50% or 100%? Is it just like who says yes to what grants or what is the commitment from the people that are pursuing this project to get to more affordable housing?
I see Jonathan went off. Yeah, I see you went off mute.
So Jonathan Ruers, I am the acting chief financial officer of the MTA, but my real job is building progress program manager. So, I mean, the answer is we're going to be going back and forth with the development team. So the housing component of the Potrero project is independently financed by the developer. And so there are 2 elements. One is the level of affordability, the percentage of the total units constructed that are affordable, and there are the total number of units. So I think it's up to each development team to kind of determine that. So in some cases, you might have a lower percentage. Somebody might hit the floor of 50%, but the number of affordable units, when you look at the total that they feel they can finance and construct, might actually be more, where another developer might take another component and say, I'm going to do 100%, you know, affordable units, but the total number of units you're getting is smaller, basing it on their financing and construction approach. So I think that's sort of the windows that they'll be working in. I think their financing packages and kind of construction approach to the shared infrastructure of the building will be elements in making that decision. But I think, you know, again, that the proposal review element of that is confidential, but I think those are the elements by which that decision will be made.
Thanks, Jonathan. Peter, I'm not sure if you want to call on whoever was next.
Claudia, does that answer your question? Did you have any follow-up first?
Well, I mean, this is just going to continue to be my essential question as we move through this process is really, who's overseeing that part of it, and what are the kind of conversations that we're having with the developers, and how are we ensuring that this is the best deal for the neighborhood in terms of affordability and maintaining the mission in this part of the city as an affordable place to live. So that's what I'm interested in. I just want to keep coming back to that conversation in this group. Thank you
so much. Scott, you're up next. Alex, you are next, and no one else is currently in the queue.
Yeah, so you mentioned that with regard to the zoning aspect, that the project can be bigger than the envelope in the draft, but it could be smaller. Are we anticipating that it would be smaller? And are we still shooting for the same, roughly the same number of units? I think it was 575 was the goal. Is that about what's been proposed?
So so when I say, no, I'm not saying it would be smaller. I'm just saying it can't be bigger, right? The envelope governs that. And, so it could go up to the envelope, but no greater than that. In terms of the proposals, those are confidential. So, in terms of, Scott, what's been proposed, I don't actually know. That's, that's part of that confidential process. But yeah, the 575 is what's, I think you're right on the 575, and that's what's written in.
I have another question about the next slide, if you could go to that. So as SFMTA is shifting its operations to MME and then rebuilding other bus yards, how close of a, is there a potential that if the city were to try to increase bus service, that the amount of space available in yards would become a bottleneck? Like, how much space is there if we wanted to buy more buses, expand service in, between now and 2027 or 2030?
You want me to try to do that one?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't know. I know that once the Potrero project opens, we'll have significantly more capacity at that location for additional fleet. But Jonathan, you may know, I don't know that I could find out more, but maybe you can help us on that one.
So the Potrero project, and this is why it's called the Potrero Yard Modernization Project, is part of what we call the Modernization Program. And the Modernization Program was built specifically in parallel with the planned growth of the Muni fleet based on future expansions of service. So part of the reason that the driving factor for this project is schedule is so that that capacity is going to be there on the day that it will be required. So two elements are really important for Potrero. One is the element that it allows for electric buses. So our next procurement, or the one shortly thereafter that, either the immediate next one or the one right after, will be our first full procurement of full battery electric buses. So we will need a location to store, maintain, and charge those. And then the rest of the capacity is meant to return the trolley coach fleet that would be at Muni Metro East back to Potrero. So the overall, the Potrero project and the projects follow the anticipated growth of the Muni fleet to allow for the exact growth you're talking about, Scott.
And so what is the assumption of growth? What would, service be in 2027 as a percent of what it was in 2019?
That's a tough question. I think we knew more about that before the pandemic than we do today. I think generally within Connect SF, which goes out to generally 2050, we typically assume about a net 20% growth in overall Muni service. I think we're closely going to be following development projects across the city. So there are some commitments related to densification, I think largely in the eastern neighborhoods and to some extent the southeast of the city, that we will be tracking over time. But this project is not meant, or the infrastructure is not going to be the thing that's going to hold back the growth of service. It will largely be, can the agency pay for that expanded service but this whole infrastructure program was meant to not make infrastructure a constraint in any potential growth in service.
Okay, so it sounds like you're saying that there's a lot of, assuming this project is completed on time, that there's going to be a lot of slack in the infrastructure in that regard.
There's supposed to be, but every procurement that we've done probably since 2014 were net expansions of the fleet. So the last 60-foot, like motor coach procurement, expanded the 60-foot fleet to allow for greater capacity on certain lines. We largely kept the trolley coach replacement the same, except the 60-foot trolley coaches, there are more net vehicles that are available for service than the old fleet. I mean, if people remember the old New Flyer fleet, like half that fleet was non-functional half the time. So the current New Flyer fleet, more of those vehicles are available for service, meaning we have larger vehicles for like the 49 and the 14 and the 30 Stockton. Again, when we look at the next replacements, we might go through that cycle again where we upsize vehicles. So the net number of vehicles might be the same, but the size of the vehicles will be larger. So as an example, Potrero allows for 60-foot trolley coaches. We cannot store those nor maintain them at the Presidio yard, which is our other trolley coach yard. And we'll have the ability to do 60-foot battery electric buses or 40-foot, depending on the need. So with each new facility, we're actually trying to build in like redundancy that will allow us to have any type of fleet at that location. So as an example, at our newest yard at Islayas Creek, like that facility can maintain a 40-foot vehicle or a 60-foot vehicle, whatever we need. So again, that also allows flexibility in the future for us to expand service or add more vehicles.
Great, thank you.
So we are at 19 minutes out of 20 for this item. Alex, you had a question, so I want to make sure we have time for that.
Yeah, thank you. I had two. One, which is about the slide. What is that? 11. Is there any reason? I mean, maybe I'm reading it wrong, and it's not chronological. Is there any reason why the design build and then the facility maintenance contract? Is there any reason why those procurements would be done after it gets all the approvals from the powers that be? Because I mean, at least in my mind, I would think it'd make more sense that, like, at least in my mind, it would make more sense that the complete project with everybody on board goes to the board of supervisors. So if there's like questions over how committed is the how committed is like the management and the building team to, how committed are they to like providing X percentage of affordable housing, and how rigorous are the maintenance standards going to be on the buildings? So, like, it isn't like a badly, so it isn't basically falling apart on us. Like, is there any reason why that wouldn't happen before it goes to get approvals, or is that just sort of, or is it not in chronological order? I'm just reading.
I don't think the numbers are chronological. Yeah, I think they could be bullets. Yeah.
Thank you. Second question about construction. With Metro East's sort of settlement situation, does that create any risks for delays, such as like, the train part is sinking faster than like, because like of the bus part being built? And is there any large risk with that being delayed and delaying the rest of the project, or is that already being mitigated through some other sort of avenue?
So on the 4 acres, we have mitigated that issue. Like, there's actually going to be tons of site remediation and soil movement to deal with that specific issue. To do, like, as an example, MME is designed that we're going to store like water and drainage on site, and that we're actually going to use that for the bus washer on site. So it's all kind of self-contained. The one issue that could be an issue is that we're adding a greater power requirement at MME because it is trolley coaches. So we're on the very edge of what the existing design allows for at that facility, because remember, those 4 acres weren't only meant for trolley coach, they were actually meant for an expansion of the LRV fleet on site. So the power requirements were assumed, but we are to the edge of the current design. We did think that some redundancy might be needed, but we all know how helpful PG&E can be on projects like this. So that is something we'd like to have, but we do think we can make it work currently. So I would say, you know, Alex, that's the only minor risk we're worried about. When we come back at a future phase with MME to convert for the expansion of rail, I think the issue you're talking about with the rest of the site, we will have to deal with.
Great, thank you. That's all I had.
Thank you. Well, before we go to the next slide, I probably had a question in the chat. If somebody who feels like they can answer, maybe Jonathan or Bonnie Jean or anyone from staff want to answer that, that would be wonderful. But with that, can we go to the next, to the next section, please? The next slide. So Jonathan Ruers is going to keep going and talk about the bond that is scheduled for this year. So Jonathan, please take it away.
Thank you, Peter. Now I will be the acting chief financial officer of the MTA. So as this past summer, the agency released Transportation 2050, which is kind of our 30-year, like, how can the agency implement its vision and what financial resources will be required to do that. The first initiative out of Transportation 2050 is the proposed 2022 Muni Reliability and Street Safety Bond. It will hopefully go for one, I am hoping the sort of almost final vote at the Board of Supervisors tomorrow. So a lot of good work. Next slide, please. So Transportation 2050, just to give some background, was an update of two prior transportation task forces. One asked for by Mayor Lee in 2013, and then there was a follow-up, a partnership between then President London Breed of the Board of Supervisors and Mayor Lee to update that transportation task force report. Both of those reports recommended that the MTA and that Muni get two transportation general obligation bonds of $500 million each. The first one happened shortly after the first T2030 report in November of 2014. That passed, if I recall, by 71% of San Francisco voters. The second one was recommended and reaffirmed in the 2018 Transportation Task Force report, and it is planned to go on the ballot 2 years early. It was originally scheduled for 2024 and will be going this June in 2022. Next slide. So the focus of the bond is on three core areas based on extensive outreach we've done with the public. The bond really focuses on improvement to the transportation system and core and key infrastructure. By investing in that infrastructure in state of good repair and modernizing it, will improve the reliability of the transit system. And then overall, we will be making investments that will improve the safety of San Francisco streets, i.e. supporting advancing towards Vision Zero in San Francisco. Next slide. So when we looked at the overall program of the bond and kind of how to design the program, there were three key elements that we looked at. The first was project delivery. If people remember, and very often you will see, the MTA is not exactly the shining star when it comes to project delivery. This was certainly true with the 2014 bond. So instead of coming up with a list of projects, and some of those projects not necessarily having to gone through community outreach or initial planning, what we want to do is focus on projects that require cash flow and that we know can have those dollars spent within 1 to 3 years. Project concepts and the initial planning are largely complete, and we already know that the technical resources are in place to deliver those projects. So those things that might have caused us delay in the past, we don't want those to be causes for delay in the future bond program. Second, just generally with regard to general obligation bonds in the state of California, assets need to be 15 years or more. So this typically means that it needs to be very civil, kind of concrete, heavy transit infrastructure, building or signals. Paint and some of the lighter things that have kind of a shorter useful life are typically not allowed. But I'm going to talk about how we did find a way to squeeze some of those elements into this program. And then lastly, with regard to the bond program, we look to things that are hard to fund through federal or state sources, or are not significantly funded through the transportation sales tax we have here in San Francisco. So after considering the recent infrastructure bill, after considering what we might get from the state, these are the things that there's kind of no other choice but for San Francisco to self-fund this infrastructure. Next slide. So that said, you'll see the overall program here. The largest chunk of monies go to the agency's facility and yard projects. And the reason for that, again, is because we cannot use our local federal funds, the funds that we get through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission or facilities. There's not a significant component of the sales tax. In fact, we have advanced all the funds in the local sales tax for these facilities. So we really have to kind of self-fund and pay for those ourselves. The other two categories leverage those sources I talked about, the federal infrastructure bill, state sources, both in Muni Forward type improvements and the upgrade of the train control system and improvement to the Muni subway. And then second, the MTA board did have 2 hearings on the development of the GEO bond. And they did hear from the community that there was an expectation that the proportions in the 2014 GEO bond between streets and transit infrastructure would be maintained. So those dollar amounts were increased. The first is largely for traffic signals, the second for major corridor projects, and the third, where we can stretch a little, for traffic calming type improvements meant to slow down speeds across the city. Next slide. So specifically, when we look at, and you all might notice a picture on this particular slide that may look familiar to you, but the facility slide, or I'm sorry, amount or chunk of money is meant to support the electrification of our facilities for future electric buses, deal with seismic upgrades at major facilities. So as this group might know, there are 2 in our portfolio that are over 100 years old. Replacing maintenance bays and bus washers, so modernizing our maintenance equipment. So the brand new fleet that we purchased, we have the actual ability to keep clean and maintain, and then support the expansion of the fleet through development of such properties as Muni Metro East for the expansion of the fleet and for us to maintain and store it. Next slide. Technical difficulties.
Did we lose Peter
It was, Violetta was actually running the
or Violetta?
but yeah, did the internet eat her?
No, that sounds like one of those unknown Microsoft like Office. I'm going to restart your computer out of nowhere in a meeting. This happened to me. So when I was supposed to present at the Board of Supervisors. Like,
here's the update you didn't ask for. Okay, let's, we'll take just a minute. In the meantime, does anyone have any questions? This would be a wonderful time if anyone had any answers. And also Claudia's question from the chat has not been answered. So maybe we could go back to that first.
Oh, that's great. So yeah, Claudia, I saw you said, what bullet does parking mitigation community impact fall into? Could you just talk a little bit more about that so I could, let's see if we can answer that one.
We talked about the fact at the very first meeting, I think that I ever participated in, we talked about the fact that there was going to be no parking on site for any of the units associated with the project. And we did not talk about it very much at all. And it sounded like it was kind of a done deal that any city property essentially was there was never going to be any parking baked into it. So I'm wondering, as a neighbor who already experiences difficulty finding parking in the neighborhood, what plans we are going to insist on to mitigate the impact of 575 units potentially needing parking. I know we hope that everybody's going to ride public transportation, but in the event that some people have cars like I do, where are they going to park?
Bonnie Jean, tell me if you want me to attempt to answer that. I mean,
I know. Yeah. Why don't you take a stab at it?
Sure. So 2 things. So one, Claudia, you are correct. The only planned parking in the building is for essentially the MTA's non-revenue vehicles, like the maintenance vehicles, like outside of buses, there's parking plan for those vehicles specifically. We have started a TDM plan specifically for the site. So that's one that's actually been going on for at least a year. And we're awaiting the recommendations on that. It is very likely once we have the lead developer on, like one of the elements will be the urban design and probably look, within a couple blocks of the site overall. It's something we did around our woods yard, where we essentially did a whole new parking plan for the streets, the parallel streets around the woods yard. I would assume that we would take a very similar approach, working with the developer to look at the parking and traffic regulations within the greater neighborhood to manage the capacity, determine what the needs are of neighbors and go through that plan. And at some point during the project, go to the MTA board to legislate those changes.
Okay, thank you for that. And sorry to monopolize with all my questions. I'd be very interested to hear more about that plan as it shapes up.
Sure.
Great. And then maybe before we can, I know we stopped Jonathan in the middle, but Roberto, did you have a question as well? Welcome.
Hola, buenas noches. Yeah, I did. So I want to address this bond issue because again, one of the things, having worked on several bond issues and how the temperature of voters are about bonds, right, is what has SFMTA done to get funding from the $2.3 trillion bill that was passed by the House for infrastructure bills?
So that's a great question, and that's actually integrated into this bond program overall. So the region is not going to get all of that money. It will likely be a couple $2 billion. Much of the funding that was in that infrastructure bill will be in the form of nationally competitive grants that the SFMTA has competed for in the past. So that's the RAISE grant, which gives states $40 to $50 million a year. So we applied in the last cycle for the Howard Street project. Unfortunately, we didn't get it, but we will actually be putting in another RAISE grant in this cycle. There'll be the bus and bus facilities grant, where in the past we've applied for, $4 to $5 million. The pilot project at the Woods Yard for e-bus chargers was funded through that federal source. There'll be the Lono grant, which is increased in that bill by 1,500%. That is to support transit agencies across the United States converting to electric buses. So we absolutely will compete for that grant, and we have in the past. We expect the formula funds within the region to go up a clip, maybe $10 to $15 million a year directly for San Francisco. Those dollars largely go to our rail and overhead projects through federal formula funds. So, I mean, we did heavy advocacy to get that bill completed and done. Two elements of the bonds. So as an example, this $26 million is meant to leverage those federal infrastructure dollars, because that legislation does require a local match and commitment. So usually for muni forward type projects, we would have a lot more set aside in the bond, but we want to have the local match and dollars set aside to be able to bring in those federal dollars here into San Francisco. So we've actually done a lot. This bond is meant to enhance that source and build on it. So either we have to fund it ourselves because it's not in that bill, or we've set aside money in the bond to play a kind of a key component in local match and getting those projects ready to compete nationally.
Well, I took the time to read that bill real good, and I don't see any reason why this project should not fit in and receive funding for it.
That's a good point. We are looking with the federal government at pursuing TIFIA for this project specifically. So that's under consideration. Originally, when we looked at this project specifically, we were concerned about federalizing it because it causes a lag on the schedule. So right now, if we choose to federalize the project, it could delay it for 1 to 2 years at this point. It doesn't mean we're going to take it off the table, but at some point, if we want to federalize it, we've got to put it through the federal NEPA environmental process. We have to work directly with the FTA, and we've started that conversation. But at some point, you're going to have to measure the cost benefit of doing that, because as we've all seen, if there are delays on projects of this scale, the amount you pay for the delay is significant.
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of delays in a lot of muni projects, so you know, uh, I don't have very much faith, you know, in terms of this magnitude of this project being done on time.
I agree, Roberto, about those concerns, but you know, I want to give Licinia and Rafe and Kirsten, I acknowledge what you're saying, but I want this whole group to imagine that in literally just over 3 years, we have a draft full EIR done, ready to be certified by the planning department. We got special legislation unheard of to do a public-private partnership on this project through the Board of Supervisors. We did the full RFQ and got 3 amazing development teams, and we're in RFP. So the speed of getting that done and doing it in a respectful way, working with the community, is pretty unusual for an MTA project. So I'm hoping that this track record of innovation and outstanding outreach will continue, so we can meet the schedule we have for this project. Because again, as I said earlier, it's very much tied to both the electrification and growth of the muni fleet. Like, we need the space and we need the technology.
It's more, for me, my concern is construction.
Yep.
You know, I've seen delay and delay and delay on construction, you know, and for a project this magnitude, it's like, you know, anything could go south. But anyway, I won't take any more time on that issue. Let me kind of move on to the state. State of California has the biggest surplus in the history of the state of California. And I've heard numerous times that I've actually been with the governor. I've asked about, you know, green, you know, he was our mayor and he always talked about green, and he was very innovative about green, go green. And so I talked to him about transportation, and he said, oh yeah, we're going to put money into transportation. So have you all pitched the governor in terms of putting money in the budget for this project? And if so, what's the tune of the amount that the state's going to get towards this project?
Yes. So well, this project and all the facilities projects we have across the campus, but we have written a joint letter amongst all the transit agencies within the region. We participated in the last budget process through the state, but actually the transportation dollars from the surplus fell through, but we're pretty sure that it will make it through the governor's budget and through the legislature this time. The current ask is that 75% of the state surplus dollars, you know, who knows how much it is, but let's, for the purposes of discussion, say it's about 10 billion. We're asking for 75% of that to go to the state transit assistance program. So that means it's a pass-through by formula to all the local transit agencies. So we, the MTA, will have the option to spend it on operations and service or capital. So that potentially those dollars could go directly into this project. The remainder of the 25% would go to what's called the Transit Intercity Rail Program. And we are working on kind of follow-on legislation, a trailer bill that would make the criteria for that particular program a little bit more broad. We're hoping to ask for money for the Kirkland Yard project, which we would like to advance, because Potrero is going to provide the first initial capacity we need for the electric buses. And we need something pretty quick based on how quickly we think that fleet's going to grow. The Presidio Yard's probably going to take too long, but we think we can get the Kirkland Yard done in time. So we're ready for that capacity as we replace the older motor coach fleet. So we are directly working with the state to get our facilities funded and create a source that's more flexible so we can meet the needs of San Francisco. Great.
Fantastic questions. I want to move it along so we don't we're getting close on our timeline here. So Jonathan, if you could kind of work through the rest of these slides here. Julian also asked a question in the chat about residential parking permits. So if somebody from the agency can prepare a question, that'll be the first one that we answer at the end of this section. So thank you all. Technical glitch is solved. Love midpoint questions and answers. So Jonathan, if you could take it away promptly here.
Sure. So this is the second of the transit category. So again, it's typical muni forward type projects. So dedicated lanes, boarding island improvements, transit signal priority. And again, through the infrastructure bill, MTC is likely to have their TPI program, their transit performance initiative. These dollars plus those dollars will allow us to continue moving forward on the Muni Forward program, largely in areas of rail, also some improvements on our bus lines. Next slide. One of the key elements of modernizing our Muni Metro network is replacement of the train control system. So that project is estimated just over $500 million. This is a good example that Roberto brought up where we do think that we can bring in significant federal funding, federal and state funding. So a great example is on March 3rd, we will be putting in a grant to the Metropolitan Transportation, or I'm sorry, to the state of California for a $140 million grant that will fund major improvements on the Muni Metro. A core element to that is replacement of the train control system. So that's a $140 million grant. This $10 million, again, shows the city's local commitment to the project. So that's where we can leverage significant dollars. Next slide. So on the street side, if you didn't know, we should replace our traffic signals every 30 years, but we are on a 60-year replacement cycle. We do not have the technology to be able to control all our traffic signals from our traffic management center. And so this $42 million is really to help us catch up on the state of good repair of the traffic signals in the city and allow us to put in the technology that will allow us to expand our pedestrian countdown signals at intersection, add audible pedestrian signals. So again, safety and accessibility improvements, and also let us do improvements at complete intersections. So that's curb to curb to curb, new signals, PCS, APS, curb ramps, and other improvements along corridors. Next slide. The second $42 million is for major corridors. So this is where we're going to do improvements along numerous streets, like Potrero is a good example of a project of that type where we did signal improvements, we did bike lane, we did curb improvements. This dollar, again, will help us leverage major grants from the state, the active transportation program, a future Vision Zero program that has not yet been defined by the US DOT, but we're working on. So again, showing San Francisco's local commitment to these projects will help us bring in those significant state and federal dollars. Next slide. And then lastly is the speed management program. So there is a significant component of the Vision Zero high injury network that the MTA would like to complete improvements on by the 2024 deadline. These would largely be quick build improvements along that network and speed reduction type programs. So really traffic calming, civil improvements. One of the elements I said is that the average age of the improvements in the bond needs to be 15 years. Well, the good news is because we have our facilities in there as an asset, they typically have a useful life of 75 to 100 years, which means that we can add a component of improvements that wouldn't necessarily be 15 years, like some minor paint and lighter improvements. And this pot of money will allow us to do that. So this 30 million should be enough to complete improvements across the entire high injury network in the quick build style. And I think that is the last slide.
I think you've got a couple more, Jonathan.
You got a couple more here.
Oh, Bonnie Jean, do you want to cover these ones?
Sure, yeah, I can cover these. So overall, the Community Reliability and Street Safety Bond, it's a $400 million bond. And the gist of this slide is basically that it's within the city's overall bond program. So, you may have seen like earthquake and safety bonds, right? Parks bonds. This is a transportation bond. And so you see the average cost there. And then understanding that the city has a current debt management policy that they have for their overall bond program. MTA, this Muni Reliability and Street Safety Bond, is a part of that. And the policy is to keep the property tax rate for city general obligation bonds at or below the 2006 rate. So basically that means, like, as new bonds go to the ballot and they get issued, that only happens when older bonds are retired. And so that way the property tax rate that people see stays the same. So that's how the policy is designed, and that would be, this bond is subject to that as well. Next slide. And then finally, just to touch on that, you can see in this overall list that this is just one piece of the overall funding puzzle of what SFMTA is looking at, right? So you see their general obligation bond program. It's the third one down. That is this $400 million bond. Board of Supervisors is actually considering placing this bond on the ballot tomorrow. So yeah, it's before the Board of Supervisors tomorrow. But as Jonathan said, and Roberto, to your points, federal grants, state grants, those are key parts of the program, as well as looking like what in the future, certainly the bond program can't fund like operating expenses, right? It's a bricks and mortar type funding mechanism. And so, what can we do for SFMTA in terms of operations? And like, as we look over the next years, like, what do we need in that regard? And so those are all things that the Transportation 2050 team is sort of considering as it moves forward. And the bond is just one of these sources to kind of address the overall needs. Next slide. I think that's
well, that ends that. So with that, we are going to be at questions. So there's the question in the chat about residential parking permits. So I'd like to call somebody to answer that. And then
so yeah, I see Jolene's question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if anyone on the call does, about residential parking permits. And Jolene, do you want to highlight? I see, my understanding is that the residential parking permit program is expanding in our neighborhood to include many of the streets. And I can certainly find out the answer for you if nobody knows about like the RPP in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that right now there's a plan that's going around and then about expanding it here in our neighborhood. And it looks like it includes most of the streets around this project area. And that, from what I've heard from residents in other large buildings that have pretty strict requirements, or people who live on Potrero Avenue, for example, they're not actually granted street parking permits like the W permit. So I'm curious if that's going to apply to this one, since you said that it's a building that cannot have it. I'm assuming it would fall under that, but I was just curious, since there were a couple other comments in the chat about parking.
So I don't know the answer to that, and I can certainly find out and get back to you.
Okay,
So
great.
I'll check on that with our.
That might be something to share with, the residents if there is a pretty strong concern about parking availability.
Sure, for sure. I mean, we might even be able to have like the residential parking permit team come, it sounds like Claudia had a question about, kind of how parking will be dealt with in this one. So that might be something we look at for a future meeting, maybe.
Thank you. I'm going to call on JR, and then Roberto, I don't know if your hand is still up from the previous question or if you have a fresh question, but either keep your hand up or lower it depending on how you're feeling. JR, you're up. Okay,
thank you. I think having RPP folks come in to talk about the plan as part of this concept is going to be important. I wholly endorse you all doing that. My question was on the ideas for traffic calming, particularly along the high injury network. My understanding is that the current definition of the high injury network is tied to out-of-date information. I was wondering what the SFMTA's process was to update what is the high injury network. I only ask because the roadways and their uses in our neck of the woods have changed dramatically over the last 6 years. And so it seems to follow that the conflicts between cars and other uses have also similarly changed.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we work with the Department of Public Health, collecting crash data, both fatalities and incidences across streets. And then the network is updated based on kind of the number, both again, the number of fatalities by intersection or along major corridors in the city. You are right that it's not exactly perfect because it's always based on older data. It takes a long period of time, either for the police department and or the CHP to report this data. So you're not wrong that the nature of streets and their use could change over that time. I think it's always been kind of an issue the MTA has been dealing with. It doesn't mean that through the regular traffic calming program, that if we get, a request and we do the traffic analysis on specific corridors or streets, that we still won't go through that through the regular neighborhood traffic calming program. But you are not wrong that definitely the nature of streets change. We do regularly update the network, probably around every 2 years, based on that data we have. And that's that, Bonnie Jean or others can share it, but the methodology and the network is in our latest Vision Zero action strategy that was completed just a couple months ago.
And if I can just add one more thing, the regular traffic calming process is very frustrating for neighborhoods that are experiencing tremendous amounts of growth, because we don't need a traffic hump. We do not need a bulb out. We need a comprehensive set of traffic mitigations intended to, reflect what we know the development patterns are, so that we can, not squeeze the balloon and push traffic one street over by one street over on the basis of, what street gets traffic calming in this cycle.
Thank you. Alex, you are up.
Yeah, just adding to that, I know at one point, Daniel Sheeter from SFMTA gave a presentation about traffic calming, well, specifically bicycle lanes along 17th Street. And I was just wondering if that's been kind of incorporated and baked into some of these RFP things. So.
Yes, that is a pre-existing condition that was assumed in the development of the RFP. I think if anything, one of the things that I think once we select a developer and once we get into the design, I think one of the things we've been talking a lot about is the design and the nature of the streets around the facility. So the existing requirements and better streets were assumed, as a baseline. But I think that will be part of the conversation once we secure our lead developer.
And I did want to let folks know I put the latest Vision Zero action strategy in the chat.
Thank you for doing that. So at this time, I don't see any questions in the chat. I see gratitude. That's nice. No other questions in the chat or on the screen here. So we're going to move along. Again, public comment is going to come a little bit later for any participants who are wanting to have their turn. You will. It's coming up a little bit. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the meeting calendar and logistics for this working group. Oh, sorry, Roberto, did your hand just come up?
No, I was playing.
Okay, cool. Okay, Bonnie Jean, please.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first meeting of 2022. And so as we do for the first meeting every year, kind of map out the working group meetings for the year. And so the group's policy has been to, kind of alternate the first Monday or Tuesday of each month. The time frame has been, 6 to 8 p.m. And so we've mapped out like for those, kind of looking ahead to the year, what that would potentially look like. But wanted to get feedback from this group, if you guys wanted to sort of stay with that. I know that, I don't know if Ryan is here. We did get feedback from a member who's unable to join on Mondays and Tuesdays, my thinking was. And so I'm not sure if the group in the past has tried other days that worked, or if people are feel that this is working for the majority of people. So wanted to kind of get feedback from you on dates and the times. And then more specifically, when looking at the calendar moving forward, as I mentioned, the procurement process is still ongoing through the spring. So it may be that the group, wants to do like every other month until the procurement process is done, or, whatever you guys would like to do. We can certainly kind of continue during that process of, kind of doing a monthly and doing updates on Mini Metro East, or, but we won't have like a really big updates on the project itself until the procurement process has come to its conclusion and we have a selected developer team. So wanted to throw those things out to the group. And then finally, you see a bullet. We're virtual now and will continue to be. I think the city has recently extended those kinds of, for all of the kind of boards and commissions, are still meeting virtually. But wanted to get a sense from this group if you all, once it's safe to do so, would prefer to go back just in person, would like to attempt some kind of hybrid format. Just wanted to get a sense from the group on that.
So with that, anyone have anything they want to share about the flow of these meetings?
I prefer virtual. Makes it easy, with family and schedules. But what did you say again too, when the review process would be over?
So the procurement process, so it's going on through the spring. So, I think it's like the time frame. If I had to guess again this, probably maybe done by that May meeting, but it'll be ongoing through the spring. The procurement process still kind of coming to its conclusion.
Is anybody from our committee going to be part of that process?
The procurement process itself. So I think so that's a great question, Roberto. What my understanding, and so basically I think when I first came to work with Potrero Yard, which was over a year ago now, but we were just sort of finalizing, and the working group had a lot of input into the RFP itself, right before we released it last April. And we had sort of questions from the working group that went into the RFP, and you guys obviously had heavy input on certain elements of it, the housing element. And I think it was decided there was sort of discussion of, should like, what about having a working group member on the panel? And I think that was all discussed and decided no. And so like that was all sort of set pre. And so that process when the RFP went out is all set now. And so the procurement process itself, the portion that we're at now, is a confidential process. And so the working group, we don't have working group representation in that piece of it, but definitely had a lot of input from you guys on the RFP itself and how that was structured.
So nodding, a couple of people have made comments in the chat. Thank you for doing so. I saw Alex first and then Scott.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in addition to working on the RFP part of the puzzle, I know at one point we assembled a bunch of questions as a working group that were going to be questions that we would then direct at the developers as part of the selection process. So I'm wondering kind of what came of that. And I don't know if there was a meeting where we heard what their responses were, or any updates on that would be helpful.
Yeah, I believe those questions went directly into the RFP, and they have to respond to them as part of their submittal. So yeah, like once that process is concluded, you'll be able to see all of the responses.
But only after one of them has been selected.
Right. So the process is a confidential process until its conclusion, similar to sort of all RFP processes at the city. And then those kinds of things can be made public. And so their responses will be right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. Now we have Scott and Magda.
Yeah, so I think if it's safe in terms of COVID, I would prefer to work in person with the working group. Just because having been to these meetings, both ways, virtual and in person, I think I found that when we're together in person, we talk more openly. People are more focused, and I think we move faster, and that we can actually spend less time with technical glitches and like, did you raise your hand or is it still up, and that sort of thing. And by moving faster and being more focused, we could actually give people more of their time back if we were able to safely meet up in person. Now, I know that's a big if. We still have a lot of Omicron right now. I'm not looking to rush into it if it might not be entirely safe, but I think when we think it's COVID safe, I would prefer that we go back to doing them in person.
Thank you for sharing that. Magda and then Claudia.
Hi. So this is about the questions that I submitted for the ER environment process. Can you remind me where are they?
Okay, let's answer that one. Then I want to stick to the calendar, the calendaring logistics questions. But can somebody briefly answer the question about where those questions can be found?
Magda, are you talking about the planning commission, the planning, like the draft EIR process?
Yes.
Kirsten, do you have an update on that?
The draft EIR is published through the planning department, so that's all available online. The final EIR will be done after the selection of the the lead master developer. So that's when the final will be available. So it's all available online under 2500 Mariposa Street. And if you have a problem, know, and we'll contact planning to help you.
Magda, I can even give you a contact. I can email you a contact at planning that you can reach out to get that, so you don't have to search around for it.
Okay, next, Claudia, your hand was up a moment ago, but it's gone back down. Would you still like to ask a question or share a comment?
Well, I did, but it's not related to what you want to talk about right now. So I can hold.
Okay, very briefly, is anyone else have any other comments? We've heard mostly support for virtual, at least for now, but not universally. But does anyone else have anything to add? Okay, hearing none. Oh, and thank you, Julian, for the comments in the chat. We'll get those down. Okay, let's return briefly to more broad questions about the project, and then we're going to go to public comment. Claudia, please.
Okay, thank you. So once we secure our developer, do we get a say in the composition of the workforce, or are there certain standards that the city will make this project adhere to around who the composition of the workforce? So who actually gets to provide the labor? I'm assuming it's union, but beyond that, are we talking about recruiting people from the neighborhood? Are we talking about recruiting people who are historically minoritized or have been pushed out, et cetera? I'd just like to know what your thoughts are on that front.
Kirsten, or I don't know if you want to take like maybe the LBE component of the project and some of the city and processes around that.
Yeah, there'll have to be a workforce development plan proposed by the lead master developer. And then the MTA and Public Works will review that and discuss it with the developer. But there are requirements in the RFP for that to be done.
Okay, and are those just standard city policies, or is that something that we as a working group have a say in terms of who gets first priority in terms of offering their labor or being employed?
We can send you that section of the RFP. It's available online. It's a fairly long document, but let us get back to you on that.
Thank you.
Sure.
Wonderful. Well, last call for questions before we open up public comment. Great. Oh, sorry, not for public comment. Thank you. The anticipated next meeting will have these following topics. Bonnie Jean, would you like to review these briefly?
Sure. Yeah, I think I was mentioning to the group, one of the things that we touched on today was sort of upcoming construction for Muni Metro East and in 1399 Marin, which is where the heavy duty maintenance would happen when Potrero is under construction. And so we can certainly, as that project makes its way through sort of detailed design, which I think we're close to 100% on that, we can give an update to this group on what that will look like. And so that's something that we can do at the next meeting. I did see a couple people in the chat saying, I thought I saw Alex, maybe less meetings, but in person, or, a couple were saying I could see more limited meetings, maybe every other month. I don't know if there's consensus around that, but these were some of the topics. And then certainly, if we do go to the MTA board on our project development agreement, when we go in February, we can give an update on how that went as well, back to the working group and report back. But if there's other topics, I know we heard a couple topics on, for example, residential parking permit program, other topics. If people want us to delve into more in future meetings, just definitely let us know.
Thank you so much for that. With that, next slide. So if at this point, any members of the public who have been listening patiently, we thank you for participating. And this would be the time that you can speak. So if you're joining via a computer, use the raise hand feature and we will unmute you. And if you're joining by phone, we will unmute folks one at a time and call out the last 4 digits of that phone number. Violetta will be doing so. And you can use that opportunity to make a comment or not. So with that, I'm looking through attendees and I'm not seeing any hands raised at this time. So Violetta, could you please read through, and actually, are there any phone numbers?
We have no dial-ins.
Okay. So at this point, I'm gonna make a last call for public comment in case we're all missing something somehow. Okay, hearing none, we'll have the next slide, please. So as always, you can reach out to staff. I hope you all know how to get a hold of them. John, Christian, and Bonnie Jean are all available to open those virtual doors and answer any questions. The detailed stuff about the very long legislation and where these questions, all that kind of stuff is great to do. With that, we are at time today, or we're not time, we're at the end of our deck. Is any last comments or anything people need to, yes, Julian.
Hi, could we come to some kind of consensus about the number of meetings before we get off this meeting? Do people feel like we should meet every month?
Bonnie Jean, I'm going to defer to you how you would like us to.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if folks have, we would love some guidance on that as well. I appreciate you raising that, Jolene. I mean, I don't know if, I know this group has been, sort of, we did I think John and I called around to various working group members back before considering taking a hiatus. And so the sense was from some of you that, when your input was really needed, you wanted to engage as often as was needed. But if it was, sort of times where it was, more like just updates or something like that, maybe less frequently. And that was sort of the impetus behind taking a hiatus during that procurement process. But, I don't know if people have sort of a general sense of every other month, or if it's for a certain time period, or if the idea of sort of depending on the need resonates. But I would love to hear more from others on that.
I would say depending on need. I mean, it definitely seems like between now and when the developer team is selected, we wouldn't really need to have a monthly meeting.
That's great. That's great feedback, Alex. What about others? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I raised my hand. I'm generally in agreement that having fewer meetings, I think, is better unless there's, something specific that you all really need our input on.
And I also agree with that as well. I mean, to the degree though, if something came up in the procurement process where I know it's confidential, but there was a question that could be posed, then I'd be happy to weigh in on that.
So what I'm hearing so far is short of consensus, but definitely a plurality are saying less often, still virtual, perhaps with the option of increasing frequency once things pick up again. So even though that's not consensus of the comments yet, that's the most common theme. And I just want to ask at this point, does anyone object to that approach for this time? Okay, so I think we have a working consensus for now to be revisited as details speed up.
And thank you, Claudia, for your comment in the email or in the chat. I very much, during the previous time, we continued to send updates to the working group and would continue to do so, even if we don't meet. And that's excellent. Thanks for bringing that up.
Anyone else? Satiated? Okay. Well, with that, I think we can conclude tonight's meeting. Thank you all again for rejoining in the new year.
Thanks, everyone. Nice to see all of you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right,
Thank
thank you
you.
all. Thank you all for
Everybody.
taking the time.
Bye all.
See you all.
Bye-bye.
Adios, buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches.
Bye-bye.
Bye.